brother. We got a recurring theme here with the homies, and it's reliving your very first experience bass fishing.
Ooh, all right.
Break it down for me, man, because you know it's
Here we go.
It's cool because you're a multi-species guy like I am.
Yeah.
Right? You got different types of fishing that you jump in like fully.
Yeah.
And to me, like the bass fishing is still very special, and it's different than anything else. So tell us, kind of, you know.
I'm gonna go this way real quick, just to give this thing some perspective.
Oh man, we're taking it deep.
Yeah.
All right, man, break it down for us.
All right, so I was born and raised here in Mesa, Arizona, and the place that I grew up in here, this neighborhood, has a system of ponds, 8 ponds that are all connected, but underground kind of thing. So you can't like travel from one to one.
But the fish can?
No, the fish cannot either.
Oh, okay.
No. So they're in the stuck, but it's the water system that comes from our canals, which comes from the Salt River chain lakes. So it's actually the same water that like we fish. Saguaro Canyon, Roosevelt, Apache. It's the water that, you know, the water comes from there. So as a kid, you know, this is under 5 years old, my dad, he wasn't like a great angler, right? He knew about like a bobber, a split shot, a hook, and a piece of corn. So this right here is actually where it all began for me.
What?
That little dock across the way that you see, this little higher section with like a ledge, this tree and this shoreline, this was all my jam right here.
That's sick.
And then this opposite side, that's lake number 7. Over here is lake number 8, a much smaller pond. Same thing, a big nice long walkway along the side, and that's where many of the gateway drug, the bluegill, first started. Right?
Okay.
So it was a bluegill hunt back then, and there used to be a lot of bluegill in there, so it was pretty successful every time. So one of these times, a couple years, fast forward a couple years, I'm in T-ball. So I think that's around like the 5 to 7 year kind of range, and I'm in T-ball, and I become friends with this kid George Igual, his parents were from Chile, mine are originally from Mexico, so they had this little Spanish-speaking connection. They became really good friends, and one of those days I rode my bike over because he lives on like lake number 2, or by lake number 2. So, or he used to live there, he grew up there too. So we would go over there, and we were gonna go catch our bluegill over there on his lake. And I had caught this like better sized gill, and I look up and I'm like, George, I got one. I wanted to show it to him. It's a little bit bigger, I got one. And I see that he's like a little further down the walkway, as you saw what it looks like now. You know, he was a little down the sidewalk thing, that walkway. And I'm kind of yelling for him, but he's too far. So I was like, man, I want to show him this fish, but at the same time, I don't want to like pick it up and like hold it out of the water all the way over to him. I was already kind of conscious about that. Like if I wasn't going to eat him, I wanted to let him go still alive. And so I grabbed my little, you know, Snoopy pole or whatever it was I had, and I was like walking the fish down the shoreline.
Okay.
At a little bit faster pace, not like this dead-on run, but also not like a slow walk. So I have the bobber, you know, doing its little like surfacey thing. The fish isn't necessarily like, you know, flopping round and round and round. I'm keeping it at a speed where he's still kind of like natural. And, you know, if we analyze this now, I had the bait pinned to the shoreline. Okay. It was just working the shoreline while I was running it with like a, you know, extended buzzbait arm for the bobber, and it's doing its thing, and I'm running over, George, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this big black, you know, fish come, and in a matter of a second, it ran up to the shoreline, and bam! It eats this bluegill, throws water everywhere, it jets back off into the deep with it, and my line starts peeling. My whole rig is just snapped it. Yeah, so it broke it. It broke my bob. It took my, broke off after the bobber, the ring, the fish, all of that. And I just sat there for like a few minutes and like tried to, what just happened? Like,
how old are you?
I had to be somewhere in that like 5 to 7 year old range.
Dang.
And it was like, dude, what was that? Like, that was my very first experience with a largemouth bass. And some of the amazing things that it taught me. Again, you can look at this thing now and analyze it.
Yeah.
Like, well, why, because for many years after that, what would I do? I would go up to an urban pond and I would just try to throw as far as I could into the middle. Because, hey, the bass are in the middle, right? It wasn't until
the longer the cast, the better.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It wasn't until years later that I learned, no, don't just throw into the middle. Like, get sideways and parallel the bank. The activity's all up here. They're right in this bank area, and that was the first time. And also this whole thing about like big baits. A lot of us start bass fishing with worms and these little tiny jerk baits, and you're trying to be a minnow or trying to be a little fry all the time. I was kind of like, no. The ones that I know eat big bluegill, not just a little baby bluegill that I caught, a big one. So like from day one, it was no big deal for me to understand this big bait concept, the idea that these fish eat these things, that these fish live here in my waters. It was all there. And that was, I guess technically that was my first experience with it. It wasn't until a time after that I saw some older kids fishing and they had a bucket, and I look in that bucket and I see like 2 or 3 of those bluegill that I catch, and I see this other longer green thing, and I was like, what's that? And they're like, that's a bass. And a bass? And what is that? Like, do you catch that on the corn? I'm like, no, that one doesn't eat corn, buddy. They eat like these, fake worms and these fake lures. Okay. And then I started going to my local, at that time it was called Yellow Front, was over here. So I go to my local, it was kind of like a hardware store that also had like a fishing section.
Okay.
And started picking out all these spinner baits and this and that and jerk baits and worms. And of course at that time I'm a kid. My dad doesn't know anything about this stuff. So he's like, oh yeah, that one looks cool, I guess. But I'd grab these chartreuse and orange and crazy colors. It wasn't until later that I had like a mentor, a friend of my dad's, that actually started teaching me how to fish for like bass in our lakes out here. That I kind of started understanding, natural, maybe that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know how I stuck with it for so long, because for so many years as a kid, I don't remember catching bass, but I remember fishing for them.
Do you remember
loving the fishing, like going?
Yeah, it didn't even matter that we didn't catch anything.
Even though, yeah, it didn't matter that I didn't catch anything. I've just figured one of these days I will.
It's held up.
It's where the program continues.
So that first experience is tragedy and dramatic.
Yeah.
And violent.
Violence.
Do you remember the first one that you actually landed?
I don't remember the first one that I landed, but I do remember early with Mark Edelman, the mentor that I was talking about. One of those, fast forward a little bit of time, and I told my dad, hey man, I need an inflatable boat to get out on these urban lakes. That's why I'm not catching fish. I need to be out there in the water. And my dad was like, you're not going into an inflatable. I know you know how to swim, you're great at it, but I'm not putting you in my son in an inflatable boat with hooks around. You're gonna do something. And he was right. I probably would have. So we went from an inflatable raft to let's look at this canoe to let's look at this like aluminum john boat to, you know what, why don't we just get a fiberglass, and at that time it was a Ranger that my dad ended up buying, this Ranger bass boat. And then luckily he had a friend that at the time fished those tournaments, Mark Edelman. He was able to say like, hey, let's go out next weekend and we'll take you guys out and like show your kid how to fish out here.
Wow.
And he was the one that he's the one that taught me all that stuff. A lot of reaction, baits. At that time it was the Rapala Fat Wrap.
Oh,
We would kill on that thing. The Rico Popper.
Okay.
Yep. And those kind of reaction baits.
Shout out to Mark.
Yeah.
Shout out to all the mentors.
Oh, man.
Shout out to all the dudes taking kids out fishing now.
And it's cool because we still see, like, we follow each other on Facebook. Like, he's still around. He still fishes, probably not as much as he used to.
That's awesome.
But yeah, he still likes the pics and comments on there once in a while, and it's always like, it's always cool to see that happen. I'm like, look what you did, Mark. Look what we ended up with.
Created the Manny Chee monster. Awesome. That's a good story.
Do you remember the first one that you landed?
Oh man, it's my turn finally. Alright, so picked up fishing at 10. Did the whole stick line thing that you guys might have heard about. Busted it off. Went back the next week, caught a catfish. Just by dumb luck. I was tying overhand knots for my knots. Like just 2 overhand knots.
Like,
bing bing. Alright, I'm good. That looks like it'll hold. Straight up blind dumb luck, I caught a freaking catfish. At the end of the day, felt like I did something special.
Yeah.
Didn't catch another fish for like 2 months. Kept going back. Old school homie by the name of Steve Takuchi was one of the old timers and regulars, and he literally would catch like 30 to 50 bluegill, red ear, and crappie every time we went. And he frankly just took pity on me, I think. Just like, all right, kid, what do you got here, man? He's looking at my $15 Kmart pole, you know, and like my overhand knots, and he's just like sitting there, you know, shaking his head and just disapproval, right? And man, the guy taught me the fundamentals and showed me, you know, how to rig my terminal tackle with a light line and this hook and this split shot for this rig, and you know, you want to fish a bobber with this rig, and just the real fundamentals and basics, and learn how to recognize bites, you know, your aggressive bites, your pressure bites, watching your line swim upwind, this and that. But I didn't know how to catch a bass. Like, there are these guys that would roll up, right? Like, oh, they're the badasses. Like, oh, those guys are bass fishermen. I was like, oh man, you know, they got all this fancy gear. They're throwing, you know, artificial lures of whatever kind, you know,
graphs that roll paper out.
Yeah. Like, you know, it was wild, man, and it seemed so out of reach for me. But then, like, I kind of switched gears, and I was like, well, I kind of got this panfish stuff down. Like, I want to catch a bass.
Yeah.
And like I did back then, I jumped in the library and read everything I could about bass fishing in particular, and the different kinds of lures and stuff. And like, I didn't know what any of that stuff was or how to use it, let alone had the right gear. So I talked my mom into buying me a little bit heavier rod and reel. Actually, just a rod. It was like this 6-foot medium action Mitchell rod.
Yeah.
And I took my Shakespeare ultralight, like little graphite reel, and put it on that, and really up my game to 6-pound trilene, you know, to really tussle with the big one.
Yeah.
And at the time, like, Berkeley power worms were pretty popular, and I bought a pack of these 4-inch curly tail Select. They're black with glitter. All the Select stuff had glitter in it.
Oh man.
In the chartreuse tail. 1/8 ounce black bullet weight, and those ugly blue mustad worm hooks. You remember those things?
Yeah, that's right.
And it must have been a size 2. And it was 6-pound green trilene line. And we're at Pudding Stone, my home lake, obviously, and we're exploring this whole new stretch of bank that I'd never fished before, and I'm standing on this rock. And I'm just throwing it as far as I can out the bank, like we just talked about, you know? Like, oh, it's got to be out, right? Those big ones are out as far as you can go. And I'm literally just winding it in, because, like, I don't know how to work a worm or anything. Like, this is my first time, like trying to freaking fish for a bass. And literally swimming this 4-inch power worm in. Just dunk! And I jerk out of instinct. And, dude, I caught like a 3.5 pounder.
Ooh.
I felt like I was a man.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I figured this out.
Yeah, it's got it.
I got him.
Ready for your own YouTube channel.
Dude, I was. If I had only known, right? I wish we had come up with that idea. But like, yeah, you see that now in these younger kids, right? Yeah. Like that spark. It's like, oh, dude, I got this all figured out.
I'm on them.
I'm a bass fisherman now. Yeah, it was February, pre-spawn, drizzly. man, crazy, very, very vivid. I remember everything about it.
No way, dude. That's so cool.
Yeah, I remember how it made me feel. Most importantly, like
Yeah.
I set out with a goal.
They say that's what keeps the memories, those feelings, those smells, the other senses.
Right. Like we should just do a challenge, you know, and go try to catch one on like that old school stuff we used to fish.
Yeah. Because you have to get some.
Nah. This not.
We'd have to get reels that would go like this before anti-reverse was invented, and you'd be reeling, and you'd hit one, and then you have to go.
Yeah. Those are terrible. You kids don't even know the struggle.
No, let's keep the program going with all this sexy ass shit we roll.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, first bass ever. And here we are now.
Bam.
Still don't know what the hell we're doing.
No.